Thank you very much, Terry. National treasure? I don't think so. National treasures end up in glass boxes in museums, and I'm not quite ready for that yet. I'm really proud to support the National Secular Society and have done so for many, many years. My own human rights foundation, the Peter Tatchell Foundation, has worked with the NSS over recent years since we've been established, supporting its really important work in monitoring, exposing, and challenging religious privilege and abuses. We think the work of the National Secular Society is really, really important. Too many people in our society, too many institutions and organizations are not prepared to stand up to religious privilege and abuse. They seem to give faith organizations and people a free pass. The NSS does not. The NSS says we're all equal, we all have equal rights and equal responsibilities. And so when religious organizations are abusing their power and their authority, it's the NSS that's in the front line to challenge that. So I'm really, really proud to support an organization which does defend the right of people of faith to hold their beliefs, even though we may disagree with them, but then insists that religious organizations and institutions should not be above or beyond the law. In the years that I've been working with the NSS, there have been so many things that I've been really proud to have been associated with. So if you look back 8 years to the fantastic Protest the Pope events when Benedict, the former Pope, came to Britain, I think I've got to say that was the march was the most exuberant and joyful march I've been on for many decades. I think the imagination of the placard writers and the people who made those placards, I've never seen so many witty placards on any one protest. And they all made serious points, but they made it with wit and humour, which gives it an added kudos and accessibility. So that was one fantastic event. I can also remember sitting on the steps of St Martin's in the Field Church with other NSS people to demand the repeal of the blasphemy laws. And we read out various blasphemous statements, poems, and so on, in a direct challenge to that law, and eventually that law was repealed. And it's been down primarily to the work of the NSS that that legislation is no longer on the statute books. Of course, the NSS has also done a huge amount of work challenging faith schools, in particular religious indoctrination, and the way in which many faith schools do not adhere to the basic principles of the education system and have been involved in all kinds of malpractices, including, as some of you will know, some of them advocating quite extremist ideas. Again, it's been the NSS that's really made the running on a lot of that issue. More recently, in years with the Church of England, inquiry into child abuse, particularly the cover-up by the Church of England, again, it's been the National Secular Society that's been on the front line there, demanding answers, supporting survivors, challenging the church and its cover-up. And then, of course, there are so many human rights defenders around the world that the NSS has supported. Again, often when others won't, for various religious sensitivities or political sensitivities, lots of organizations haven't championed people who've often been in the front line of human rights defense, particularly in relation to challenging religious intolerance and prejudice. So it's given support to people like Pragna Patel of South All Black Sisters, Mina Ahadi in Germany, Safak Pavi in Turkey, Miriam Namazi, and Taslima Nazarine, who had to flee Bangladesh because she was being hunted down by Islamist extremists. So the work that the NSS has done and is still doing is so hugely important. And it's doing work, as I said, that often others are too timid or afraid to do. So we really need the National Secular Society, and it performs a very important role. I'd just like to finish by saying a tribute to Terry Sanderson. I've known Terry for nearly 40 years. Apart from his work as an agony uncle, he has done a lot of really important work for the LGBT community, starting in the early 1970s. He did a column called Media Watch for Gay Times, which every month recorded homophobic media coverage of LGBT issues and helped very successfully to highlight that homophobia and to get action taken to try and stop it. And the fact that we have a more, less hostile, less homophobic media today is in part down to Terry's astounding, extraordinary and very sustained campaigning on that issue. As you know, Terry's been involved with the National Secular Society for 2 decades. For many years he was a council member, and then for the last 11 years as president. As you've heard, he's stepping down from president, but he's going to carry on his work as a vice president. And so it's one step down, but we're going to be still seeing and benefiting from Terry's wisdom and experience. I mean, he has done a phenomenal amount, together with Keith and others, in transforming the National Secular Society from a fairly fringe organisation into an organisation that's really in the mainstream of setting the agenda, putting politicians on their toes. And he's also done a lot to actually raise the issue of human rights as a National Secular Society concern. That isn't just about opposition to religious privilege, but it's about defending human rights and looking at religious privilege through the prism of human rights and equality. And I think that political change, that shift, has actually been incredibly effective in empowering the voice of the National Secular Society and making its ideas and work more accessible to a much, much wider audience than in the past. So big tribute to Terry and all those in the NSS who have been part of that process to change the organisation in that positive direction. Just a couple of other achievements I'd like to mention. Under Terry's presidency, the National Secular Society went to the United Nations to challenge the Vatican and hold it to account over child sex abuse and the subsequent cover-up and the protection of paedophile priests and bishops. Again, a difficult issue, but not one that the NSS shied away from. One it took, grabbed, held onto, and carried through at the United Nations, and of course here in this country as well. Under Terry's presidency, the NSS also had 3 very successful interventions in the European Court of Human Rights to defend human rights and to defend the equality laws. The idea that these laws apply to everyone, including religious people and organisations. So the big 3 victories were the case of Gary McFarlane, a counsellor with Relate, who had refused to provide counselling to a same-sex couple or to any same-sex couple. The case of Shirley Chaplin, the nurse who against health and safety advice insisted on wearing a crucifix at work. And the case of Lillian Liddell, the civil registrar who refused to do civil partnership ceremonies for same-sex couples. Those are 3 major legal wins, major historic legal wins, pioneered by the National Secular Society in the European Court of Human Rights. And the impetus and the success of those interventions went much wider than those 3 cases. It established a clear benchmark that religious individuals and organisations are not above the law, that all of us have equal rights and equal responsibilities. So it is a great, great honour to have known Terry and worked with him over these years. It's a great, great honour to have worked with everyone in the National Secular Society, present and past, because the work you do is so important. It is so important for people in all walks of life who so often experience the heavy hand of religious intolerance and prejudice and the attempt by religious people to put themselves above the law. So please join me in giving a huge round of applause to Terry and to everyone in the NSS.